Let me start by asking you something. Have you ever had a moment like this in your life? You walk into a room, and everyone in that room looks at you, but not in a good way. You know that look. That was exactly the moment Cecily Hartwell experienced. That night, one of the biggest balls in London was taking place, a grand hall, gleaming chandeliers, expensive dresses everywhere, jewels, champagne glasses, and in the middle of that crowd stood Cecily, with a single dress, looking like someone who had picked the wrong fork. In short, someone who did not belong among the rest of that room. But here is the real thing. Not everyone there noticed Cecily that night. One person noticed her very clearly, Countess Dorothea. And Dorothea chose that exact moment, the very center of the crowd. That moment when everyone was talking and laughing. She turned. Her voice rose. It rose so loud the entire hall heard it. "How did this girl get in here?" There was a second of silence. Then the room laughed. They really laughed. Cecily froze where she stood. She could not even put down the fork in her hand. Sometimes humiliation arrives like that, all at once, without giving you any time to prepare. But at that exact moment, while everyone was laughing, another sound was heard. The sound of a chair, a short creak. Someone had stood up. A tall man, a dark suit, a man everyone in the room recognized. Julian Ashworth, one of the most handsome and powerful dukes in London. No one expected this. Dorothea did not expect it. Maud did not expect it. Cecily certainly did not expect it. But Julian Ashworth had stood up, and suddenly, the room went silent. Now I will tell you the story of that night, the story of Cecily, the story of her single dress, the story of her sick father, and the story of the man who stood up in that hall. If you are ready, let's begin. Cecily Hartwell had been a very different girl 5 years ago, truly different. When she came down to the breakfast table in the morning, 3 servants were already waiting. What cup would be used, which jam would be served, whether the window should be open or closed, everything had already been decided. All Cecily had to do was sit down in her chair. In winter, they went to the big house in Yorkshire. In summer, they stayed at the house on the Cornish coast. And between those seasons, there were balls. There were invitations. There were nights at the theater. Cecily grew up inside all of that. And for a long time, she thought it was normal. But it did not take long for her to learn it was not. She was 18 when her father became ill. At first, it looked like small things. Her father missed a few meetings. He could not get out of bed for several days. Doctors came. They left. Then they came again. Cecily did not ask questions, because she was afraid of the answers. Then things started to disappear. First, the Yorkshire house was sold. Temporary, they said. Then the house on the Cornish coast was gone. The market is bad, they said. Then the cars, the servants, the cook. There was always an explanation for every loss. Logical explanations. Temporary explanations. But the temporary thing never ended. One morning, Cecily woke up. She went downstairs. There was no one at the breakfast table. She poured her own coffee. That was the day she understood. Now she was 23. The house in London was still there. Her father had sold almost everything to keep that house. A name matters, he used to say. The Hartwell name must remain standing. Every morning, Cecily looked at that house. Large, cold, half empty. Rooms that had once been full were now silent. There was only one servant left in the house. An old man. He worked without taking a salary, because he had served the Hartwell family for 40 years. Some people are like that. They do not leave. When it came to dresses, Cecily once had beautiful dresses in her wardrobe. Once now only 3 remained. One for mornings, one for daily wear, one for balls. The ball gown was navy velvet. It had been made 5 years earlier. It was still beautiful. But London society notices everything. Who wears what? Who wore it how many times? Which jewelry is real and which is imitation? And Cecily went to every ball wearing the same dress, that navy velvet dress. No one had said anything to her face yet. But they were looking. Cecily had learned to recognize those looks. The first year, she did not notice. Or perhaps she did not want to notice. The second year, she ignored them. The third year, she got used to them. But perhaps getting used to it was not the right phrase. Sometimes people do not get used to something. Sometimes they simply freeze. When a person is exposed to something long enough, they put it somewhere. They place it somewhere deep. They store it there. And then they continue their life. Cecily did the same. She kept going. Because she had no other choice. Her father was sick. The house had to be kept. The Hartwell name still meant something, at least a little. And every evening, Cecily put on that navy velvet dress. She held her head high, and she walked into those halls. Until that night. Until that night, no one had said it to her face. But that night, someone did. Countess Dorothea did. Julian Ashworth was known in London. Truly known. 30 years old. Duke of Ashworth, and unmarried. In truth, those 3 facts were enough. London society would fill in the rest on its own. He was invited to every event. His name was mentioned at every ball. He was the man every mother wanted her daughter to meet. In a way, he was the most valuable bachelor in London society, and everyone knew it. Countess Dorothea especially knew it, because Dorothea had a daughter. Maud. And Dorothea was not subtle about it. At every ball, the same scene played out. Maud on Julian's right, then on his left, then at the piano. Maud would look at Julian while she played. Julian noticed. Everyone noticed. And frankly, Julian was tired of this game. In fact, Julian had grown tired of many things lately. Those halls, those faces, those conversations. The same things had been talked about for years. Who married whom, who spent whose fortune, who lost which title. From the outside, it all looked brilliant. But from the inside, after a while, it all began to feel the same. That, too, was a kind of boredom. The complete opposite of Cecily's world. Not the boredom of having nothing. The boredom of having too much. His father had died the previous year. In his final days, he told Julian only one thing. Julian still remembered that sentence. "In this city, everyone bows to the powerful," he had said. Then he added, "You stand beside the weak." Julian had nodded at the time, but to be honest, he had not done much, because the opportunity had not appeared. Or perhaps it had appeared, but Julian had not noticed. Until that night. Until Countess Dorothea stood up that night. There is no need to speak long about Dorothea. You know this kind of person. They exist in every society. A widow, wealthy, sharp-tongued, and extremely calculating. Dorothea had one goal: to marry Maud to Julian, because that marriage would secure her status. So Dorothea used every opportunity. She drank. She spread gossip. She humiliated people. But she did it all with a smile. The reason she chose Cecily that night was actually very simple. She had seen Julian look at Cecily, just for a moment, a very brief moment. But Dorothea caught that look, and Dorothea never missed things like that. The ball was at Lord Pembridge's house, one of the largest mansions in Mayfair, a 3-story building. Halls that could hold 100 people, and the chandeliers. They were so large that everyone who entered instinctively looked up. Cecily had looked up too. In fact, she looked every time, because it had become a small habit of hers. Before entering, she looked at the chandeliers. Pause for 1 second. Take a breath. Then walk into the hall. She was wearing the same dress as always, navy velvet. The first hour passed well, or at least Cecily survived it. There were familiar faces. Familiar looks. Cecily smiled. She greeted them. Then she stepped off to a corner. Her plan was simple. Stay unnoticed until dinner. But sometimes, plans do not work. The first mistake happened at the dinner table. Cecily picked up the fork on the right. It was the wrong fork. It was the fish fork, not for the meat. It was actually a very small thing. But London society loves small things. The woman beside her noticed. Then the woman beside that woman noticed. Then the whispering began, and that whisper spread across half the table. Cecily noticed it. She put the fork down. She picked up the right one, but it was already too late. Then the dancing began. A man asked Cecily to dance. He was an older man, a polite man, and harmless. Cecily accepted. The dance began. Cecily took a step. The man took a step too. They both went in the same direction, and they bumped into each other slightly. No one fell. Nothing really happened, but everyone saw it. A small laugh came from the corner. Cecily apologized. The man apologized too. The dance continued, but that laugh had started to grow. By then, something in the room had changed. That whisper, that fork, that dance step. It was all building, and it was going somewhere. Dorothea chose that exact moment. She was at the far corner of the tables. She was wearing a purple dress. She had on a large necklace. Maud was beside her, and Julian. Julian was at the head of the table. He looked bored. He was staring at his wine. Dorothea stood up. Her voice was loud, deliberately loud. "Children," she said. "Who is this girl?" Then she added, "How did she get in here?" The room stopped all at once. The music was still playing, but the people had stopped. Heads turned. Eyes shifted toward Cecily. One person, then Beam, then N, then almost everyone. Someone laughed, then someone else, then more. Cecily stayed where she was. Something was happening inside her. She did not know exactly what it was. Was it shame? Was it anger? Maybe both. She had clenched her hands into fists without even noticing. Dorothea was still looking at her and smiling. Then Cecily did something. She did not run. At least not right away. She stood still for a second. She looked around the room. She looked at those chandeliers. She looked at those laughing faces. She looked at those tables. 5 years ago, Cecily. She had been sitting at those tables. She had grown up under those chandeliers. Then she turned. She held her head high and walked toward the door. Her steps were calm. She was not rushing, but her eyes had filled with tears. She was holding them back, but they were there. She reached the door and left the hall. At that exact moment, Julian stood up. Dorothea was startled. Maud was startled. The whole room was startled. Julian pushed back his chair. He left his napkin on the table. He looked at no one. Not at Dorothea. Not at Maud. He simply walked toward the door, and he too left the hall. It was an October night in London. Cecily walked down the mansion steps. She reached the pavement. Then she stopped, because she did not know where to go. Actually, she had had a plan. She had hired a carriage. It was supposed to come at 11, but it was only 9, so Cecily had 2 hours ahead of her. 2 hours. She was going to wait in front of that grand mansion. Cecily laughed to herself. It was a bitter laugh. After everything that had happened, there was this, too. The door opened behind her. Cecily did not hear it, or maybe she did not want to hear it. Footsteps came closer. Then she heard a voice. "Miss Hartwell." Cecily turned. Julian Ashworth was there, without a coat. He had clearly come out in a hurry. He had not had time to get his coat. He was standing in the London cold, in nothing but his suit. Cecily looked at him, then turned away again. She looked at the pavement. "Thank you," she said. But there was no need. Julian answered at once. There was. Cecily frowned. Why? Julian did not answer that right away. Cecily turned back to him. Her eyes were still full. But now there was something else too. Anger. "You were laughing too." Julian paused, then shook his head. "No." One word. Flat, clear. Cecily answered immediately. Everyone was laughing. I was not. I did not see you. Julian thought for a brief moment. Because you could not look, he said. You left too quickly. There was silence. 2 people stood on the pavement. Around them was the sound of London at night. Carriages in the distance. Voices. But silence between them. Cecily spoke again. Why did you come out? She paused. Really? What was the reason? Julian waited a second. Then he began to explain. He spoke about his father. He told it briefly. His final days. That room and that single sentence. In this city, everyone bows to the powerful. Then the last thing his father had said. You stand beside the weak. Julian had remembered that for years, but he had never done it, because the chance had not come. Or maybe it had, but Julian had not seen it. Then he looked at Cecily. Tonight I saw it, he said, and I could not stay seated. Cecily listened to him. Then she let out a short laugh, out of disbelief. So I was an opportunity, she said. For you to carry out your father's last wish. Julian shook his head at once. No. Cecily narrowed her eyes. Wasn't I? This time Julian spoke more slowly. No. He paused. If you had been an opportunity, I would not have come after you. Cecily said nothing. Julian continued. An opportunity is not searched for. It is found. Used. And left behind. Then he looked at Cecily. I did not come here to leave you behind. Cecily heard that sentence, and something moved inside her. Did she want to believe him? Maybe. Did she believe him? Not yet. But she was listening. When the carriage arrived at 11, Cecily got in. Then she lowered the window. Lord Ashworth, she said, you did a good thing tonight. She paused. But you will not need to do it again. Julian looked at her. His answer was brief. I will decide whether I do. The carriage pulled away, and Cecily left. Julian stayed. There, without a coat. In the London cold. In London, a secret never lived long. At most 1 night. By morning, everyone knew. When Cecily came down to the breakfast table that morning, old Thomas the servant was in his usual place, but something was different. Thomas said nothing, but his face did. You know that expression. I heard something, but I'm not asking. That expression. Cecily noticed it, but she said nothing either. An hour later, the first note arrived. A small envelope. A woman's handwriting. Cecily opened it. The note was very short. What happened last night was very bold. Julian Ashworth followed you out. The whole of London is talking. Be careful, my dear. There was no signature. That day, 3 invitations arrived. That was not normal. Normally, Cecily got 1 invitation a month, sometimes none at all. But that day, 3 had come. And all 3 came from houses where Julian Ashworth's name was often heard. That was how London worked. Something a man did became a woman's story. In another part of the city, Dorothea had gotten up very early that morning. Actually, she had not gotten up. She had never slept at all. The way Julian pushed back his chair, the way he walked toward the door, it had not left her mind all night. Years. Dorothea had worked for years. She had planned. She had calculated. All of it was for Maud. And now, that Hartwell girl. Maud came down the stairs. Her eyes were swollen. Mother, Julian. Dorothea raised her hand. Sit down. Maud fell silent. Dorothea set down her cup. She was thinking. Then she spoke in a calm voice. We have not lost Julian. A short pause. Not yet. That day, the same subject was being discussed in every corner of London. In Hyde Park. In the clubs. At tea time. Everyone was asking the same thing. Julian Ashworth went after a girl. Who is the girl? She must have planned something. The Hartwell family is finished already. Julian sometimes does strange things. Someone would shrug. It will pass. Cecily had to go out that day. She needed medicine for her father. She stepped into the street. On the pavement, she ran into 2 women. One of them smiled. Last night was quite eventful. The other added, Julian Ashworth rarely does things like that. Cecily lowered her head slightly. I do not know. I do not know him. One of the women answered with a small smile. Not yet? Both of them laughed. It was a polite laugh. Measured. But there was something in it. Cecily smiled too, and kept walking. When she turned the corner, she stopped. She took a deep breath. Something had changed. The way people looked at her. But it was not a good change. There was curiosity. There were whispers. There was gossip. Cecily had been pulled into a game, and she had not chosen it herself. The invitation had come from Lady Forsyth. A tea gathering, a small gathering, selective, only 15 people in total. Cecily normally did not go to gatherings like that anymore. Not anymore, but Lady Forsyth had been an old friend of her father's, so refusing the invitation would have been wrong. Cecily went. When she entered the drawing room, she saw Julian. Cecily stopped for a second. Truly, only for a second. Then she understood. This was not a coincidence. She lifted her eyes and looked at Lady Forsyth. The older woman was smiling, an innocent smile. Too innocent. Julian stood up. He gave a slight bow. Miss Hartwell? Lord Ashworth. Cecily nodded. Then she walked on. She crossed to the far corner of the room and sat in the chair farthest away. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Julian stood up. He walked across the room and sat in the chair beside Cecily. Cecily looked at her teacup. A coincidence, Julian shook his head. At least he was honest. Cecily asked directly, What do you want, Lord Ashworth? To talk. We talked last night, not for long. Cecily set her cup down on the table, then turned to him. Her voice was low. She did not want anyone to hear. "Look," she said. "Whatever you did last night, it was kind." She paused. "Truly." Then she went on. "But London is talking now. My name is being mentioned everywhere. My name." She fell silent for a moment. "And it is not helping me. On the contrary, it is making me a target. A bigger target," Julian asked calmly. "Are you afraid of Dorothea?" Cecily shook her head. "I'm not afraid, but I do not want to make enemies for no reason." Julian answered at once. "Dorothea is already your enemy." A short pause. "She was before last night, too. You just did not know it." Cecily did not answer, because that was true. Julian kept speaking, quietly, without rushing. "I want to see you again. I'm saying it plainly." Cecily raised her eyebrows. "Why?" Julian thought about it, and this time he did not lie. "I don't know exactly." Then he added, "But last night, when you were leaving, the way you walked, the way you held your head, I saw something." Cecily was silent. Julian continued, "I want to understand what it was." Cecily looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. Then she spoke slowly. "Lord Ashworth, I am the daughter of a fallen family. I have a sick father. I have only one ball gown, and now all of London knows it." Then there was a brief pause. "You are the Duke of Ashworth. Where do you think this story goes?" Julian lifted his shoulders slightly. "I don't know." Then he added, "But we will not find out if we do not go there." Cecily looked at him for another moment. Then she stood up. "Good day, Lord Ashworth." Julian did not stand. He did not follow. He stayed where he was, sitting there with his cup in hand. As Cecily walked toward the door, he did not call after her. He only watched. At the other end of the room, Dorothea was sitting. She had seen everything. Julian standing up, sitting beside Cecily. That quiet conversation, Cecily getting up and leaving, and the look in Julian's eyes. Dorothea set her cup down on the table. She turned to the woman beside her. She spoke in a whisper, but she was smiling. "Do you know about the Hartwell family's debts?" The woman shook her head. "No." Dorothea leaned in a little more. "I do." The invitation was at Lord Harrington's house, one of the biggest dinner parties of the year. A long table, 30 guests, and the most distinguished names in London. Under normal circumstances, Cecily could no longer have attended a gathering like that. But Lady Forsyth had stepped in again. Cecily could not refuse the invitation, and she went. Dinner began. At first, everything was normal. First, the soup was served, then the first wine. There was light conversation around the table. Cecily held her head high. Julian was seated on the other side of the table. Dorothea sat in the middle, and she was laughing, talking. She looked like the most cheerful person at the table. Cecily noticed it, and something tightened inside her. This cheerfulness was not real. The main course arrived. At that exact moment, Dorothea raised her glass. She spoke with a smile. "I want to ask something." The guests turned toward her. "Is there a philanthropist among us?" There were small laughs around the table. A few people half raised their hands as a joke. Dorothea laughed too. Then she turned her head and looked at Cecily. "Because," she said, "I was wondering what the Hartwell family is doing at this dinner." The room went silent at once, but Dorothea did not stop. Her voice still sounded polite. Her smile was still in place. She spoke as if she were making ordinary conversation. "The Hartwells have debts, in many places. To the bank, to the chemist. even to the coal merchant. Then she turned to Julian. "This girl is expecting charity from you, Julian." She paused. "Are you aware of that?" 30 pairs of eyes turned to Julian at once. Julian looked down at the table. His face was completely calm. Cecily, on the other hand, had frozen at the table. In front of everyone. She could feel that familiar sensation inside her. Her hands had become fists. Her breath had stopped. But this time it was different. This time, more than shame. There was anger. Cecily stood up. Slowly, without rushing. She made no sound as she pushed back her chair. The room was waiting. Would she run? Would she cry? Would she apologize? Cecily looked at Dorothea. Straight. Calm. Direct. "Countess Dorothea," she said. "For 12 years, you have been at every ball, every dinner, every tea gathering." She paused. "You know everyone. You know every house." There was a brief silence. Then Cecily continued. "And yet no one likes you." She tilted her head slightly. "Have you ever wondered why?" The room held its breath. Dorothea's face changed. That smile wavered for the first time. Cecily kept speaking. "My father has debts. Yes, because my father is ill, and ill men sometimes fall into debt." She paused. "That is not shameful." Then she looked at Dorothea. "But if a healthy woman's only purpose is to crush other people," a short pause, "that is shameful." Cecily finished speaking. She straightened her chair. She set her napkin on the table. The room was waiting. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Now she would walk to the door. But Cecily did not go to the door. She sat down again. For a few seconds, the room stayed like that. Then someone on the right side of the table laughed. A short laugh. A real laugh. Then someone else. A small wave of sound spread across the room. Dorothea's cheek had turned bright red. At that moment, Julian looked at Cecily, from across the table, from the middle of 30 people. Cecily was sitting straight. Her head was high. Her hands were resting on the table, and she was looking ahead. Julian saw something in that look, the same thing he had seen on the pavement, but this time it was clearer, stronger. This woman did not break. Sometimes she might bend, but she did not break. Julian made his decision in that moment. Dinner ended. People began to rise from the table. Julian approached Cecily, in the crowd. He spoke in a voice low enough that no one could quite hear. "Tomorrow. Hyde Park. Afternoon." Cecily looked at him. "Is that a question?" Julian shook his head slightly. "No." Cecily looked at him for a long moment. Then she gave a short answer. "At 2." And she walked away. They met in Hyde Park. It was a cold afternoon. The trees were bare. The sky was gray. The park was almost empty. Cecily arrived early. Julian arrived exactly at 2. They walked for a while. This time, their conversation was different. More relaxed. More real. Cecily spoke about her father. This time, more openly. Julian listened. This time, more carefully. More deeply. An hour passed. Then Julian stopped. He turned to Cecily. "I want to visit your father." Cecily was surprised. "Why?" Julian did not answer right away, but his look was the answer. Then he said something short. "Tomorrow. Before noon." Julian came to the Hartwell house the next morning. Cecily met him at the door. She let him inside. They went up the stairs together. Quietly. The father's room was upstairs. Cecily stopped at the door. Julian went in. Cecily could not see inside the room, but she could hear. Julian spoke. His voice was low. Calm, Cecily's father answered. It was a tired voice, a weak voice, but it was still clear. Cecily could not fully understand what they were saying. It was not the words she heard. It was the tone. Then there was silence. A long silence, and Cecily heard something. Her father was crying. Softly. You know the way men cry. They try to hold it in, but they cannot. That kind of crying. Cecily knew that sound. She had heard it at her mother's funeral. She had never heard it again until now. Cecily's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth with her hand. She leaned against the wall. Inside the room, Julian said something. One single sentence. Very quietly. Then Cecily's father laughed. In the middle of those tears. A broken but real laugh. When Julian came out of the room, Cecily was still leaning against the wall. The two of them looked at each other. Julian did not speak. He only looked. Cecily did not speak either, but her eyes said everything. They walked down the stairs together. They went into the small sitting room. The old servant Thomas brought tea. His hands were trembling, but he was smiling. They sat down. There was silence for a while. Then Julian turned to Cecily. Cecily. He said her name, for the first time. Cecily lifted her head. Yes. Julian waited for a short moment. I have not asked yet. Cecily smiled. I know. Then she added, but my answer is yes. Julian looked at her. That man who had been bored for years, the man whose every night had been the same. He smiled, truly, sincerely. The wedding took place in March. That year, it was the only thing London talked about. The Duke of Ashworth and the Hartwell girl, that girl with one dress, the girl who used the wrong fork, the girl who had been humiliated in front of everyone at that ball. Now she was the bride at the most magnificent wedding London had seen that year. Cecily did not wear the navy velvet dress that day. She had a new dress. White long. One of the most beautiful wedding dresses London had ever seen. But there was a small detail. On her sash, there was a thin strip. Navy velvet. Thomas had cut it, from the fabric of the old dress. Cecily had asked for it, because that dress was not shame. It never had been. Dorothea was not invited to that wedding. Maud quietly moved to the countryside. No one asked much about where she had gone, and Dorothea, the sharpest tongue in London, the most dangerous woman. She slowly disappeared from those salons. Debts came to light. Connections broke. Invitations grew fewer. No one had done anything to her. Life had done it. Sometimes the best justice works like that. You do nothing. You simply wait. Now I will let you go. But first, I want to say something. The thing that affected me most in this story was that navy velvet dress. Cecily wore it for 5 years. Everyone saw it. Everyone noticed, but no one said it to her face. Until Dorothea did, and Dorothea used that dress as a weapon. But Cecily carried that dress to her wedding day. She stitched it into her sash. Not as shame, but as strength. I want to ask you something. Do you have something like that in your life? Something someone used as a weapon against you, but that was actually your strength? If you do, write it in the comments. I am truly curious. Thank you very much for listening to this story until the end. You can write where you are watching from, which city, which country, whether it is night or day. New stories are on the way. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss them. See you in the next story.